No, well, people might be curious why a big beast like Lend-Lease might be at a conference like this, but I explained this morning at I've had 25 years at Lend-Lease. I joined as a carpenter and joiner, one of the few women in those days, back in the mid-80s, and have worked in a whole lot of roles, including like site delegate, safety manager, and I have the privilege now to lead our whole strategy around Indigenous engagement and creating economic participation. So it's a wonderful life, and it's a good company like that where you can do those sort of things and reinvent yourself in your career. So reconciliation action plans for people who weren't in the session this morning have only been around since, the first ones would have been done in the mid-2000s, but now there's over 900 organisations with reconciliation action plans, and that covers a huge percentage of Australian workforce. And organisations with RAPs go from a Lend-Lease. So Lend-Lease is a property and development company. We've got about 8,000 people, employees in Australia, but more overseas. But people with RAPs, councils have RAPs, state governments have RAPs, federal government agencies, schools, all sorts of organisations have RAPs. So one thing I'd like to say, at the starting point of this is that partnerships are very much starting to grow and they're respected, and RAP organisations coming together with community organisations, with local Aboriginal land councils, with all sorts of other organisations in a collective impact approach is certainly growing. So there are great opportunities for investment, but what we all need to do is get all the ducks in a line and understand what we all want to achieve out of it. Because a partnership's like any great relationship, you need to understand what you want and who you're hopping into the old sack with, at the start of the, it's late in the afternoon, I'm allowed to say that sack word, I don't know, anyway. But you get the picture. So, a few years ago, the Bourke community came to Sydney and said, we're sick of the housing stock we've got out at Bourke, we've got all these problems, this and that, and they had a big lunch with a whole room full of corporates. So Dave Lydiard, in his capacity of bringing people together, actually organised this big corporate lunch. And little old Bourke, which is 850 kilometres west of Sydney and unlikely to ever see a Lend-Lease giant big footprint job happen there, came and said, who's interested? And we stuck our hand up and we said, well, we are. Because, as part of our RAP is respect relationships and growing opportunities. And too many times what we do and what we practice in this field is all about big cities and urban environments. And, that's where the government policy is all sitting at the moment too. Well, I'll just get rid of this picture of my dog and put my notes back up here so I can read them. But why wouldn't we be out learning from rural and regional and remote areas about how to build, what the issues are out there, how people want to live in a house? From an Aboriginal perspective, what does a house mean? And we learn lots of things working with Bourke. We learn about, and a house is more like a home. We learn about the cultural and the dreaming perspective that's attached to the house, but all those issues that other people might have. And it's going to be different between, Bourke and Tamworth and Northern Territory and a whole range of other things. But you need to involve the community in this process. So, some of the things we learnt from our interaction with Bourke was about how to engage the community in the co-design and co-delivery of houses, and then what are the wraparound services and what are the projects and how do you get the local people involved in the building construction. So that sounds all wonderful, but we've only to date actually achieved 2 houses in Bourke, which were done through Murdy Parky Regional Enterprise Corporation at the time. But we are working on a pipeline. So a lot of the issue about investment is about pipelines. So a big organisation like Lend-Lease, it has to make business sense. It has to make business sense with all the partners. So what we learnt in Bourke, and although we do Delphin, we do community, so we do Alkimos or Yarrabilba in Queensland or Ropes Crossing or Jordan Springs, so there's different ones, but we don't actually physically build the houses, so we don't have house builders. We hire house builders, residential builders, to build the actual houses. But the process is really important and can be applied and scaled up to a big project. So this morning we looked at Gosford Hospital and what we've done with Gosford Hospital, which is currently sitting at 25% Indigenous employment, and 2/3 of the apprentices are Aboriginal and that sort of stuff. So you can do wonderful things in partnership. But, you know, what we've learned in Burke, and I think what we've seen across Australia, is models and programs and pilots, you know, start and finish and end, and you know, people want to go and reinvent something, and oh, but we haven't done that here, or it didn't work in the Northern Territory. So we've had this great big scattergun approach, and that's been a big disincentive to business coming in and investing. And from a community point of view, it's been a bloody big waste of money, because what we did learn in Burke is how much is actually skimmed off in all sorts of layers of project management and you know, different dollars flying everywhere at different times and not necessarily landed where they needed to. So this model of, and what is the model? Indigenous, social, affordable, mixed-use housing. The biggest problem is that there's no tripartite government agreement, and there's not really, you know, coherent policy at state government or federal levels, really. So that, and plus that with the structural disincentives. I was sitting in a little session before lunch and all the stats went up and the bar charts and, you know, here's 2017 and the Bureau of Statistics and this and that. You know, the problem with some of this lies in the cracks, what's in between. So what's not reported in the stats? So, you know, it's all those things about why people might not want to declare their true need or circumstance. So it's a bit hard to get a hold of the issue. The issue keeps moving and there's no real policy. Now, Lendlease also works in the UK, where there's very clear defined policies in the City of London about if you want to go and build something, Lendlease, there has to be a percentage, this percentage of social, that percentage of affordable, blah, 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 and it gets done. So, you know, the issue for us is, why can't we do it here? And there is no real cookie-cutter approach. You know, we can, what we've learned in Burke, we can apply elsewhere, but every community is different. So we need to be understanding that how, you know, we can do things in a certain manner, but we need to go to the community as early as possible to get their buy-in on what that particular community needs. Yeah, a lot of what you hear about federal government, Smart Cities 2016, and the investment in innovation and attracting investment, but it's all about cities, isn't it? Not regional Australia. There's 5 Australian cities in Australia are home to 2/3 of the population, and 2/3 of the you know, 3/4 of Australians live in those cities. I'm not too good on stats, which is what I'm reading. And that equates to 80% of gross domestic product, GDP. So higher density living creates that lower carbon footprint. You know, governments want to invest close to jobs, transport, infrastructure and all the rest. So there hasn't really been an analysis of what the values and benefits are of rural and regional living and growing, you know, cities and places in those further out places, I guess. Some of the other lessons that we've learnt from working in Burke, and I know Alistair's here, I certainly don't want to talk on behalf of the Burke community, but a lot of it's pretty public and listed on Justice Reinvestment and Just New South Wales websites and other things. But you had a town of 60 service providers servicing about 2,500 people. And most of the people didn't know what they all did. There were so many gaps, there was overlays, there was, you know, and everybody was working on their own mission, which is fair enough. Why wouldn't you? Your organisational mission. But it wasn't the same mission as the community wanted. So what they actually went in Burke to do, and they went to the state government and Bosco and New South Wales Uni and everybody, and they said, forget the department, the census data, tell us what's happening in Burke. We want real, local, real-time data. And, you know, once we've got the evidence, then we know where to go and what to invest in and how to do it first or second or third. So they actually have drawn this wonderful map which shows life in Burke from 0 of age to 25 years. So what happens to that person? And they've drawn down all the data from the state government on education, health, how many mums there are, how many times kids go to, you know, have an appointment at this, that and all the rest. And on the back it's got the incarceration rate. So how do people in Burke get into trouble, get in and out of trouble, might be diverted, might be going to jail, might come out, might go back in again. So they've drawn a plan for the community. They've got their community aspirations and self-determination plan, but they've also used that data to say what are the priorities. So they're able to know what their housing priorities are, their incarceration, you know, what they're doing with young people, and they pulled together all the service providers in Burke, and now they're operating very differently. You know, they found out they had 20 youth workers, but none of them worked of a weekend or after 5 p.m. You know, no child psychologists here. When are the kids getting in trouble? You know, school holidays and Christmas and X amount of time of day of the night and time of the year. You know, the youth PCYC shuts at 4:30 of a Friday. So, you know, like you think this is easy stuff. Why can't we fix this? So it's about bringing partners together to really unwrap all that stuff and understand what is it we want to achieve in this place here. What's the mutual benefit for all of us? And do it in a collective action approach. And sometimes you might have to draw down different people, knowledge, companies, ideas from different places. And that, so your partnership might grow and change over time. But I'm throwing this out to you as just to stimulate the thought about, you know, with what you want to do with your community housing providers, what's your plan? Are you very clear what your plan is, what your capacity is, what your capability is? And once you get that sorted, then do what Burke did and go and have a look for partners who might come and bring different things and try doing things a little bit differently. Align your missions, you know, not on institutional or government levels or whatnot, but on the community lessons. And I think service reform is an important part of this, you know, not just at institutional and government levels and not just in housing and social service policy, but also in that whole design, procurement, tendering, planning processes, and also jobs and transport and land use policies as well too. So we need to be thinking a lot broader about this, if you get my message, but you also have to be doing it locally. So building a pipeline of investment, we need to think about what can we do to align all the government or who are the users out there, where's the requirements coming from, and try and line all those tenders up so we've got a consistent flow of work. Once you get a more consistent flow of work, then you can do more training and employment. You can grow a building construction company. You can grow a maintenance company that can do the rounds. So, you know, centralised planning, long-term planning and thought, but really then focused on local solutions. So I think there are starting to be a few examples of that around Australia and where it does work properly. So partnership with willing and capable partners, understanding the dedicated resources, understanding if you are going to do deals with corporates or organisations from outside, they're going to be risk averse. Most companies are. So, you know, in that partnership you need to give it enough time to build trust and respect. And that'll only be built by success. So sometimes when you start these partnerships, you might know where you're going to end up, but you just start them and see what happens. So with the Burke houses, we thought we were building social houses or Aboriginal houses or whatnot. They ended up selling the two things. So IBA come in and there's families there, and then now they've pre-qualified all these families around the whole region if they want to have houses. So I'm going to leave it at that because I think there's a few things there to provoke a bit of thought and question as a bigger group. But, you know, fly in, fly out is not the answer. Bringing trades and groups from outside and project managers from outside is definitely not the answer. And the one other thing is how do you manage and motivate your community in some of this too? Because a long time, because of the transgenerational trauma, it builds an apathy. How many communities do we work in where people are sick and tired of being told, you're no good, there's too much crime here, something, 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 something. Hundreds of reports, commissions, recommendations. People are sick of it. People want a bit of action. So let's just start somewhere and see where some of these relationships can go. Thanks.
Cath, I'll get you to stay up. Have we got is there another microphone up there or just the main one? Okay, so we have to do what we did in the other room. I just wanted to ask you a question then. So the video you showed this morning, which was on the Gosford Hospital, and you know, you've got to absolutely hand it to Lend-Lease to have 25% Aboriginal employment. There's great outcomes for apprenticeships, and it's because it's a big project and it's been going for some time. We're obviously at the AHO trying, you know, we're doing really good things. Ash and Craig have both had some great results in terms of Aboriginal employment once we've really focused on it, and particularly local. But give us an example of a real barrier. You would have hit one, of a real barrier either internally within Lend-Lease or one of your subcontracting companies. And I'll give you an example. My wife works for a big industrial roller shutter company, and they've come up against Aboriginal employment targets, and they're just completely floundering. There doesn't seem to be a whole, Lend-Lease is good, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of support out there, sort of segue for businesses to go to and say, hey, I've got this tender, I have to satisfy this requirement, I have no freaking idea how I'm going to get there, I don't have any Aboriginal employees, I don't know who to speak to. Can you give us an example of a business that you had that situation, and how did they get through it?
Yeah, look, and Lend-Lease got some good pockets, and that's of excellence, and we're still working everywhere. This isn't, you know, we're working on a whole solution. Because it's no good in piling people onto a site or a project if there's no cultural safety there, you know. Giving people a job or bringing businesses in are no good unless that organisation is organisationally ready, and that means there's been some cultural awareness and knowledge and training. Otherwise, you're bringing people in to be told by subcontractors, you're only going to steal my tools, you know, they want you here all the time. There's no Aboriginal people live here, they're not around, they don't run businesses. So there's that whole raft of you know, conscious and unconscious bias and stereotyping that happens that you really have to knock down. So we've actually used our partnerships with communities and with other Aboriginal organisations to connect us in, to find the right people and the right solutions. And we certainly, we ask for 100% cultural awareness training, and it's not just one course, it's many courses plus immersion and working with the local elders and the community to do different things at different times for our own people, so that, you know, we can make a success of it. So there's been examples where things don't work, but you've just got to push through and think this is what happens in a company or a business is a reflection of what happens in society too. So rather than go to people who think they've got the answers, we go straight to the communities or the organisations who are out there doing stuff and knocking the lights out. They've got good programs that are successful, and we ask them to show us and help us and connect us into the right people. Because who are we? We're not experts in this. Yeah, those organisations are.
All right, thanks. Throw it open to the floor for any questions for Cath on the topic she just talked about.
Hang on. Sorry, just 1 second.
Get shock on the mic.
No, yeah, I've got one.
Cath, we're subcontracting to Heron, who are doing a dredging contract at the Eden Wharf, and they've got a requirement to do cultural awareness training. They were actually in the contract. It was to do with the Eden Lauk, but the Eden Lauk fell through because of staff moving and whatever. So they haven't done it yet, but they're saying to us, well, look, our machinery and all our staff sitting idle, it costs us $300,000 a day. We don't want to do a day's worth of cultural awareness training. Can you do a half-hour session for us? What would you suggest we say to them?
No. Don't care about your problem. You know, they've got a contractual requirement, and they should do it, but more, you know, More to the point is that we hear this all the time. Time is money, and everybody wants to cut it down. And once we've run out proper cultural awareness training run by Aboriginal people, our people, that's been the biggest motivator for us and for our people, because they've just been absolutely shocked, shamed, didn't know we were that dumb and that stupid, we didn't know this happened. So if you get the proper training, it can actually act as a motivator. So we started that with the senior managers first, so that then they push the others. So we've worked this all the time at the top levels and at the bottom levels, so that they get them in a pinch and manoeuvre. So I think you need to work with your people and say, this is about safety, this is about cultural safety. You know, we talk all the time about physical health and, physical safety on site, but there's mental health and wellbeing, then there's cultural safety too. And this is part of our shared Australian history, and we need to do it. So you just got to push through that stuff. And I think once you start doing it and the light bulbs come on, it's like a little epiphany, you know. Sometimes it's a bit embarrassing seeing people who, after one course, I know this, I don't know all the stats, you know, I'm culturally aware. That can be dangerous too. So, you know, push them. That's all I say. Do the 12 hours of it if you have to, and get your union involved, or look for partners who can help you push the contractor along a bit. I don't know.
Do we have any other? Yep, we do, from Nick.
Yeah, hi. I mean, sounds like Lend-Lease, great, really proactive. But you're talking about partnerships. Any tips for, providers? You know, Lend-Lease, big organisation. Partnerships take a while to develop. How do you get? It's almost like, how do you get started? Who does what? Should it be a provider approaching Lend-Lease? What's the role? Yeah, any tips around that sort of stuff?
Well, we approached Darkinjung. But Darkinjung only agreed because they know what we did in Burke, so we had a little bit of street cred anyway to start with. But we went down, we were invited to go and present at the Native Title National Conference last couple of weeks ago in Melbourne, and we've gone up and worked with the Aboriginal councils and mayors and organisations up on the Cape. So we're pushing it, but communities should push it too. So the PBCs at North Queensland Land Council came after that conference and said, you want to come up and talk to us? And we went, yeah, because it may never end up in work, but you don't know what you're going to learn along the way. And what also helps is to have funnels. So, we're using the big LALCs. We're doing the next agreement is with the Northern Land Council, which we sign off next year. Now, we've got a couple of defence projects there, but we don't know what the pipeline is or where the projects are yet. But what we can do now is go up and start and talk about the protocols and how we'd like to work together and what we could do and achieve together should the opportunity arise, and you just start with that. So, yeah, the size of the organisation does matter. But I think if you use your peak bodies to go through, like if you go through Supply Nation, if you're a business and you're there, or through the Chamber of Commerce to try and get them to connect you to the right opportunity. Reconciliation Australia is another organisation. You can get online and see who has a RAP. You can find organisations what you think, oh, that might suit me. So health organisations, Bupa have got a RAP. So, and then use that way to get in. And go to some of the business career days that are put on. Come and meet the business type of things that Supply Nation do. So I wouldn't be scared not to take the first steps. But what I would suggest is you know exactly what you want, because if you don't know what you want, and you can't explain what you want, you're both going to be wasting each other's time. So get your strategy together first and think about that. And then seek advice from some of those other peak organisations, even New South Wales, Land Council, Northern Queensland Land Council. Go through some of those representative bodies and say, how are we going to do this? Because corporates and businesses don't want to go to 100 PCBs and TO groups and everything. If we can funnel it, which like Victoria, Native Title, the National Native Title Council are going to do those introductions now for some of those businesses who went to that conference.
Okay, we've got one more. Yep.
Just on the point you made that, other organisations do the actual building of the homes. At some point, Lend-Lease hands over their project to individual actual deliverers. How do you, what mechanisms or, what do you do to actually try and get the fantastic, work you've done and commitments and ideas you've got with the Aboriginal community? How do you get others to deliver it and then actually police that, if for want of a better word?
I'm going to answer that. Ruthless execution of the contract from my personal experience.
Yeah, we have to make sure all our people know what the plan is and they're all pushing in the right direction, firstly. But we already have audit processes for things. As a matter of fact, it's getting to such a state now that, for example, in the Northern Territory, say you've got your New South Wales participation is 5%, and we go to our subcontractors, you need 5% to reflect what we've got in the head contract, and we can police them. But how do we know those people are Aboriginal? Am I going to ask them for their common seal documentation? But in the Northern Territory, the bloody government are starting to say we're going to prosecute businesses if you don't. You're getting that money fraudulently. So as a head contractor, that responsibility can come back onto us. So I don't know, we might have to go to a stat dec to ask people if they're Aboriginal or not. So it is really hard because not everybody wants to declare their Aboriginality either. And once you start tying contractual requirements and money to this stuff, then it opens itself up to a lot of rorts. So, yeah, we do audit it and we police it and we're working with those, but you really have to win the hearts and minds as well as push things through a contract. So what we're talking about here is really generational change. We're overcoming generations of, colonisation and shit policy and trauma and things. So healing is a really big part of the process as well too. So I know that's not an answer, but by placing those workers at Gosford Hospital, we saw this morning, they're placed in our subcontractors. So they're with the electricians, they're with the plumbers, they're this and that. And that in itself overcomes a lot of the stereotypes and drives people. I go, oh, they didn't rip me off, they didn't steal my tools, it's not so bad. Oh, they're a person. Oh my God, It's that hearts and mind changing stuff that we need to work on.
I'd be interested to know where you sourced those guys for the Gosford project, the apprentices and that. Was it through AES or how did you...
AES, through relationships, we set up Koori Job Ready early on through the union movement, and then it went to the National Centre of Indigenous Excellence, and then they closed it down. And the people who were running it actually went over to AES. So we kicked it off again, Lend-Lease and AES and Militafe. And we've grown it back, so they're running an iTrades program nationally now. So it's iTrades, iRail, iCivil, iTraffic, that thing. Yeah. So so they're pulling them from community, but what they're doing is taking them into a hotel situation, live-in residential, bringing the community in, doing the yarning circle, doing all the life skill stuff with a huge community input right at the front end in an accelerated way, and then make sure that we put them on the right projects with the right people, like you saw in this morning's video, who will make sure that that's a success from there. And then obviously AES do the ongoing mentoring and, yeah.